James Gunn has been making movies for a very long time, whether he's giving us talking raccoons, zombies, or Christmas specials that we didn't know that we needed. This man just knows how to craft a story that sticks. So today I'm ranking my top 10 favorite James Gunn projects before Superman drops this summer. And just like any other top 10 list, this one is going to be debatable, so make sure you drop your list down in the comments. Now that's enough talking from me, let's get started. Starting us off at number 10, we've got Scooby-Doo. Yes, the live action one from the early 2000s. Now I know what you're all thinking. James Gunn wrote that? Oh yeah, he did, and you can totally tell and realize how much humor and weirdness the movie actually has in it, but the thing is, it's really great. It took the classic mystery and gang that we all grew up with and makes them even more exaggerated versions of themselves. And let's be honest, Matthew Lillard as Shaggy, perfection. He embodies the character in a way that no one else could, and his chemistry with Scooby-Doo, even though the CGI is a bit rough, I'm serious, it's bad. This movie is packed with jokes that totally flew over our heads as kids, and looking back, you can completely see that Gunn was trying to sneak in as much edgy humor as possible. And while some of it works really well, other moments felt like they were stuck between a kid's movie and something a little bit too grown up. And the reason that is because the movie was supposed to be way more adult, or at least PG-13. That was the original intention when he was writing it. And then the studio forced changes to make it more kid-friendly, which I completely understand. But in the end, we got a movie that was hilarious, it was nostalgic, but also a little bit messy. I mean, it's got charm, but it's definitely the least polished project on this list. And coming in at number 9 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now don't get it twisted, I love Volume 2, it just doesn't hit quite as hard as the other entries in the Guardians franchise. But let's go and talk about what it gets right. The character work in this movie is phenomenal. We get to see Yondu's arc come full circle, Rocket's emotional depth, and the absolute gut punch that is,
I'm sorry I didn't do none of it right. I'm damn lucky you're my boy.
That moment in particular hits every time. It was such a great and smart way to send off a character who started out as this rough, selfish pirate and ended up being one of the most selfless characters in the entire MCU. And then there's Ego. Volume 2 didn't just give us a throwaway villain that had no connection to the MCU or their characters. This one in particular had a deep connection to Peter Quill. Kurt Russell brings this eerie, laid-back charm to the role that makes Ego both likable and absolutely terrifying once you understand what he's trying to do. Peter is finally confronting the truth about his father, Rocket's pushing people away because he's afraid of getting hurt, and Yondu proved that he was the best father figure that Peter could have ever asked for. It all lands perfectly. Now having said that, the humor in Volume 2 does feel a little bit forced, especially with Drax and Mantis. That connection is funny, but it does feel a little bit forced. There are moments where the jokes just go on for way too long and the scenes just feel stretched out, and while I love this movie, it doesn't quite reach the top tier of James Gunn's best work. At number 8, we're getting gross with Slither. This is peak James Gunn horror comedy, and if you haven't seen it, you absolutely need to. It's got body horror, creepy crawlies, and Nathan Fillion being the perfect sarcastic hero that you'd want. But what really makes the movie work is how funny it is, despite being completely disgusting. Gunn has a way of balancing over-the-top gore with humor, making sure that you're laughing even as you're cringing at some of the most weird, gross things that you could possibly imagine. And while we're at it, let's talk about the creature design. The slugs, nightmare fuel. The grotesque, bloated human hosts that end up happening, disgusting in the best way. And the practical effects that were used were so well done, and they give this movie a classic horror feel that makes it stand out from other modern horror comedies. And not only that, but the cast is another highlight in the film. We have Nathan Fillion and we have Elizabeth Banks, and they both do such a great job at what they're trying to do. They bring so much personality and charm to the characters that could have easily felt generic in a lesser movie. And Yondu himself, Michael Rooker, as an infected, grotesque monster, absolutely terrifying. But Slither is definitely not for everybody. If you hate the gooey, slimy, gross humor, this is definitely not your jam. And while I think this movie is an underrated gem, I completely understand if some people do pass on it because it is very out there. At number 7, we have the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. Now look, I never thought in my life that I needed to see Drax and Mantis kidnap Kevin Bacon for Christmas, but apparently I did. But what makes this special work is how much heart it has. It's goofy, it's festive, and it expands on the Guardians' dynamics without taking itself too seriously. And that moment between Peter and Mantis, I mean, there is nothing more Christmas than that. Now this isn't a full movie, so it doesn't feel as big or grand as the other projects, but it definitely deserves to be on this list. And number 6 is the Suicide Squad. This movie is pure James Gunn. It's hilarious, it's violent, it's gory, but it has some emotions to it. While the Suicide Squad is an absolute blast from start to finish, it's not just chaos for the sake of having chaos. And that is what makes it so good. Unlike the 2016 version, this one actually understands the characters and gives them some meaningful arcs. For example, Ratcatcher 2 was one of the best new characters in the DC universe. And Bloodsport, way more interesting than just being a discounted Deadshot. And King Shark ended up being a national treasure after watching this movie. It manages to be both an insane action comedy and a surprisingly heartfelt story with a bunch of misfits finding their purpose. The action is incredible, the humor lands perfectly, and the R rating lets Gunn go full throttle on his signature style. But the reason that it's not closer to number 1 is simple. It's a very fun, it's a very good movie, but it's not as impactful as the other ones on this list. And coming in at number 5, we have the Dawn of the Dead remake. James Gunn wrote it, Zack Snyder directed it, and somehow between the two of them, they gave us one of the best zombie movies of all time. The opening sequence alone is legendary. That first 10 minutes is peak horror cinema, setting the tone perfectly for what's to come. The sense of dread is immediate, and the way that it builds tension right from the start is masterful. But what makes this movie work is how much it focuses on the characters. This is something that James Gunn does in all of his films. You start to care about them, and so when things go bad, and they do go bad, it makes everything that's happening so much worse. The cast is fantastic, and the way that their relationships develop throughout the film adds emotional weight to every major moment. And at number 4, we have Creature Commandos. Gunn plus weird monsters and tons of action, that is a match made in heaven. Now this is James Gunn's first animated project in the new DCU after he took over at DC Studios. But does it deliver on the crazy promise of its premise? Mostly. While the concept of a ragtag group of supernatural misfits definitely hits Gunn's signature style perfectly, the animation does make it feel a little bit different than his live action movies, and that's both a strength and a weakness. On the plus side, the animation gives him full creative control. He can go as wild as he wants without budget constraints. The visuals can be as over the top as possible, and the action sequences can be bigger than anything live action could handle. On the flip side, some people might not feel as connected to these characters as they would to live action ones. Look, Gunn's strength is making you fall in love with these weirdos. His heart and his humor shine throughout all of their performances, but can animation carry the same emotional weight? The answer is an absolute yes. This just solidified that he can do live action great, and he can also do animation great. And rounding out the top 3, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Volume 3 is an emotional roller coaster and easily the darkest film in the trilogy, but it's also an incredible, satisfying conclusion to the story of the Guardians that we've grown to love. And it's a movie that does not hold back on the heartbreak. Rocket's backstory, I don't even want to think about it. And the High Evolutionary is one of the most hateable villains in the MCU. The action is incredible, the humor still lands, and the emotional beats hit hard. It's one of Gunn's most mature and well-crafted films. So why isn't it higher on the list? There's a few reasons for that. First, it doesn't have quite the same rewatchability as some of his other projects, and the heavy emotional weight that this movie brings means that it's not as fun and easy to just throw on and have a good time watching. And while it's a fantastic finale, it just doesn't quite have that same fresh, game-changing feel that the original had. And our runner-up is Peacemaker. Okay, if you would have told me years ago that Peacemaker, a spin-off from the Suicide Squad about a character that most people have no idea who that was, I didn't know who that was before Suicide Squad, this would be one of the best projects that James Gunn has ever made, I wouldn't have believed you. But the genius of Peacemaker is how it takes a character who was pretty much a joke in the Suicide Squad and turns him into one of the most compelling characters in the DC universe. And it does this while still being one of the funniest and most insane shows you'll ever watch on TV, especially that opening. Don't ever skip the opening, always watch the opening. It's a perfect example of how Gunn can just take the weirdest, most unlikely characters and make them unforgettable. John Cena absolutely kills it as Peacemaker, and the supporting cast that's in this show is just as memorable as he is. The show is packed with ridiculous humor, incredible action, and moments of genuine emotion that you would have never expected from a show based on a guy named Peacemaker. It's a near perfect blend of almost everything that James Gunn has become a master of. And the only reason that it's not number 1 and it's number 2 is because it lacks that cinematic oomph that the movies have. But as far as TV goes, this is top tier. This is something that no one expected to be even halfway as good as it was. This is an unskippable piece of James Gunn history. And of course, at number 1, we have Guardians of the Galaxy. This is the movie that changed everything. It changed the MCU going forward, it changed James Gunn and his career going forward, and it changed comic book movies as a whole going forward. But what makes Guardians of the Galaxy so special? It's not just the humor, it's not just the soundtrack, it's not just the action, and it's not even the incredible cast. It's all of that combined with the fact that this movie had no right to be as good as it was. It became one of the most beloved superhero films of all time. And before this movie, almost nobody knew who the Guardians was, myself included. A talking raccoon in a tree? That sounded ridiculous, but somehow James Gunn took these characters that nobody knew about and turned them into icons. The chemistry between the cast is perfect, the humor is genuinely funny, and the emotional moments just hit the right way. Plus the soundtrack, absolutely legendary. This movie has rewatchability like no other, it's endlessly fun, it's packed with heart, and set the stage for everything great that came after it. And like I said before, this is the movie that launched James Gunn's career. He had projects before this, of course, we already talked about those, but this is the one that launched his career straight up and did not look back. Guardians is his most important movie that he has ever made, prior to Superman. We'll see how that kind of shakes out, but if someone asked me, show me a James Gunn movie, show me what this guy can do, I'm showing them Guardians of the Galaxy. It's funny, it's heartfelt, it's exciting and full of personality. Everything that we love about James Gunn's style, it's all in this movie. And that is exactly why Guardians of the Galaxy takes the #1 spot. So what'd you all think of my list? Did you agree with it? Did you disagree with it? Let me know in the comments what your top 10 James Gunn movies are. Also, since James Gunn's over at DC now after being at Marvel and he's running DC Studios, who do you think has a brighter future, Marvel or DC? Check out this video right here and I'll give you tons of reasons why each one has a chance. But that's enough for this video, I'll catch you in the next one.